Okay, yeah, I had to bounce around. The first number I tried kicked me out, so this one worked though. So I'm here. Sounds like we have a quorum if I'm the fifth.
You're the fifth, if I'm counting correctly. Yeah, there's Alan, Kurt, Scott, Andrew, and you. We have Dar Kirk is on the telephone as an alternate for Kelso. Chief LaFave is alternate for.
He is saying that he cannot talk to you.
What was that?
Chief Kirk is saying he muted.
Andy, something's going on with your sound. You kind of fade off right away.
Don't tell him that, Alan.
And we have the sixth with Sheriff Thurman joining.
Okay, yeah, I know the sheriff and I were just on a separate call, so we were a little bit late. So as long as we have the numbers, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. It's 10:03, and we'll call the meeting to order. Rachel or Phil, do we need a official roll call, or are you comfortable with the list you have in front of you?
I'm good with the list I have.
Okay. Up next, if you want to go through, is everybody okay with the agenda that was sent out as presented, or does anybody have any changes?
Looks good.
I'd second that we approve it.
Okay, I'll take Alan's looks good as a motion, and then Sheriff Thurman's second to approve the agenda as presented. Is there any further discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. And then up next would be item 3, approval of the meeting minutes, the meeting from May 13th.
Scott Neves moved.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented. Any further discussion on those minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Item 4, public comment. Do we have anybody on the line who wishes to comment? Okay, I am not hearing anybody. So we'll keep scooting along. Item 5 would be payables. Anybody have any questions regarding the payables?
Scott Neves moves approval.
I'll second. Kurt?
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve the payables as presented. Any discussion on those? I didn't quite catch that.
There you go.
I think somebody flushed the toilet.
Or maybe they need to. I don't know.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the payables. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any
I guess the only thing we don't know is if the
It's audio.
my mark.
We can hear you, Jim.
Yep, just make sure you're muted.
I'm having some technical difficulties. I'm trying to work through here. Apologize for that.
Okay, I just want to make sure there was no nay votes on the payables. Okay, payables are approved. Then item 6, we have a financial report for information only.
Rachel?
I'm here. Okay. So the same thing that we normally see. Looks like for the most part, our revenues are right on track. We haven't done a lot of our major transfers yet, just because we haven't finished major projects. So when those happen, you guys will be updated. Other than that, we're looking pretty good on the rest of our expenditures through the year. And looking to see, I know down later we're going to talk about the sales tax, but I thought maybe right now would be a good time to talk about that. I don't know if Phil wants to step in and talk to you guys about that, but we did some projections to kind of see what our revenues might look like. Did you want to talk about those, Phil, or do you want me to do that?
I think it's the pleasure of the board, but it'd certainly be good if you can share your screen. If you have that up, that would probably be beneficial for everybody to see that. Is that okay with you, Joe?
Yeah, that's fine.
Let's see what screen it's going to show. Share screen.
Can you hit
It said host disabled participant screen sharing. Do you want me to still host back and then do it? I think I can do that.
Here, hold on a second. You can try it now.
Okay. Perfect. Let's see. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, perfect. So what I did was I laid out 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020 revenues January through December. And then I did the percent change from the prior year. So 18 is compared to 17, 19 is compared to 18, and 2020 is compared to 19. So if you see on this line right here, we had an 8% loss from 19, and that was for our actual March revenues that come in May. And so I projected 30% for the rest just to be on the safe side, but we're still going to pull in about 1.8 million if that happens. I assume it's going to be closer to 20% because I think the 8% loss was only a partial part of March, not the full month. And so I'm projecting that probably 20% would be more realistic for the rest of the months, but I did 30 just to be safe. So we're looking good. We're above what we budgeted, so sales tax will still look good.
Well, that's a little encouraging anyway.
You guys have any questions on that? Does it make sense?
What was our budget for 20, Rachel?
I believe we budgeted 1.7, but I will double check.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine. I was just curious.
Yeah,
Anybody
we
else
had
have-
1.7.
1.7, okay, good.
Yep.
Yeah, when we had our
Other-
budget workshop, we talked about that, about making it more realistic for 2021 and to think more along the lines of budgeting $2.1 million. But that hadn't been budgeted yet for 2020. So the 1.7 was 2020. So it wasn't like we were clairvoyant or smart or anything. It's just that we were being extra conservative with some of our projections for what sales tax revenue would do.
Okay,
And it looks like that conservative projection then was a wise projection.
Well, always in hindsight, it is for sure. Yeah.
Anything else on the financial report for either Phil or Rachel?
nope.
Okay, sounds like we're okay to move on to item 7. We have a contract update with Rice Fergus Miller.
If you look at page 1 of their contract in the packet that you were sent, that captures all of the changes to the budget. And so the bulk of it is in number 1 and number 2 of this amendment. And when we were doing some of this geotech planning for the Ocean Beach site in particular, I asked that that the architect would retain Shannon and Wilson from this point on all the way through construction, rather than having to update the agreement again. And so right now, our agreement with the architectural firm is through the design phase, design development, and the construction documents, and then we'll have an amendment from them for the construction phase. So the Shannon and Wilson agreement, because this work is going to be done this year, or is projected to be done this year, wanted them to be part of the construction phase, all the way through the construction phase of the pile casting and the foundation. So that's what this adjustment does. And so it's for their part, it's a $89,000 change, or in addition to that. Cost would have come to us later anyway, because most of the all of the consultants that Rice Fergus Miller has is all the way just through the design development, not through the construction phase. And so this brings them on already to start planning for that construction phase. If that makes sense to people, if there's any, if you understand that.
So these numbers are numbers that you anticipated and were budgeted for. Is that how I understand that?
Yes, further on, yes.
Yeah, later in the process, you're sort of front loading it at this point a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just wanting to make that amendment now for this geotech work. There's just a lot of work that they can do right now that we wanted to get them going on.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Other questions for Phil?
No, that makes sense to me, Phil. Do you need a motion?
Yeah, it would be an amendment to the Rice Fergus Miller agreement that we have. And so it would be to accept the amendment that they have here. I didn't touch on the third part of that, and that is for Stanton to do some lighting engineering for the dispatch floor.
Right, I saw that.
So that's that third point there, and that's at $6,500 if I remember correctly.
So I'd make a motion to approve the amendment as presented.
And I will second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the amendment to the Rice Fergus Miller Professional Services Agreement. Any other discussion on this item? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And let's see, up next would be item 8, user fee proposal.
So I'll just introduce this a little bit and then turn it over to Rachel. But we've had a number of requests for budget planning for next year's, and wanting to have an understanding what the user fees would be for going forward. In our current system, we've been had an amendment or an agreement that we would carry the current user fees through 5 years, and that started in 2016, and so it expires at the end of 2020. We've had a little bit of conversation at budget workshop time about what that would look like, and it's just a critical issue for all of our users for sure, especially in light of the current situation. And we took language out of our radio tower agreements, those that we have lease agreements with and other user agreements with on our tower sites, and have this language before you, and Rachel can go through that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so it says, the language reads, the annual use fee adjustment shall be calculated by multiplying the annual use fee then in effect by a fraction, the denominator of which is the increase in the United States Department of Labor Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index, CPI, U.S. city average, urban wage earner, and clerical workers from the October to October, or 3%, whichever is greater, immediately preceding the payment due date.
So Rachel, maybe you could post that on the screen so that they can read that too, because if I was to hear that just verbally, I would have been completely lost.
Let's see. Let me see if I can find it on here. But basically what it says is that the CPI urban wage earner and clerical workers from October of the prior year will be what we'll look at to see if you guys will get an increase there, or if 3% is more than that, you'll get 3%. But whichever is the greater increase, that's what it will be. Let me see if I can find the wording.
I have it here as well. If
Here you go.
Would
You guys see that?
Yeah.
would it be the CPI or 3% greater, or whichever is the lesser?
The wording in our radio contracts is whichever is greater, but that would be kind of up to you guys how you want it to go.
Because to me, that says that, well, it's,
At least 3%, basically.
yeah, 3% minimum. And, you know, if we get into a recessionary economy and inflation remains flat, I'm not sure why we would justify a 3% increase. And I'll leave it at that for now.
and we just borrowed language from our radio contracts that we currently have.
Okay.
Our radio tower contracts is what I'm saying.
Right.
So anybody that's using space on our tower sites, they have that language, and it increases at least 3% a year. But I also understand exactly what you're saying, Kurt, is that I'm not sure that that's something that all the users would be jumping up and down for joy for right now.
Well, I mean, obviously, we need to cover the costs of any increases that you might be subject to, but I don't know how that translates into our user fees. And I guess that's kind of the question.
Right.
I don't know what percentage of the budget. I mean, like most, I assume your budget is really driven by your staff and those union contracts and such, probably not so much by these radio contracts.
And I had a comment, Phil, based on my knowledge of CPI and labor contracts, the October numbers that you're looking at, you wouldn't have those probably till mid-November. Just suggesting maybe for budgetary purposes, if we're going to use a standard, do something that would get us a number earlier in the year for budgetary purposes. Probably helpful to have either a number by August or September, I would think.
Right, and we could always lag it a year too, so you could use it for that October for the following year. So you would always have like a 14-month awareness of it. So it depends on how you set up the lag. And so we would always be behind a little bit by 14 months rather than be right on time. And that is a way to do it as well. If we wanted to tie it directly to a CPI, I think that would be an option as well.
You know, another one you could look at, Phil, is the July to July, as the sheriff mentioned, because that one you would have then by August, early September.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of the requests we've had have come in already for next year already now. So if we use the previous October to October, then we would have that number by you know, January 1st of the year. And then anybody that was starting to do budget prep for their next biennium, for example, we would have that already well in advance.
Yes, okay.
Phil, can you remind me, is the labor contract, is the annual cost of living adjustment, is that based on the CPI, or is that a flat percentage in the contract?
It's a CPI for the next year, or 2%. I'd have to look at it for sure, Alan, but it's based strictly on that CPI. But it's not exactly this one. It's the Western States CPI, and it's based on A rather than BC. So it is a little bit of a stronger CPI, but when I've looked at them, they're both been tracking pretty closely. So the CPIU and the CPIU BC is all populations less than a million, and the other ones are, the A is for populations above a million, or some population that's pretty large.
Mm-hmm. My thought is that the wages and benefits piece for employees is one of the largest chunks, if not the largest chunk in the budget, and is going to affect the budget the most. So we probably need to have something that tracks or make sure that we cover that piece of it.
And if this radio contract wording was acceptable, we would cover that. I was just being cute.
Yeah. Yeah, you would cover it all right. Then you wouldn't be a not-for-profit then, Phil.
Yeah, we would.
Chet's here.
Morning, Chet.
Good morning. A little bit late, apologize. I've been here for a little bit, but not from the start.
So anyway, that's food for thought. I don't know if you have any specific guidance right now.
I just had a question, Phil. You're proposing this moving forward using the basic funding formula and using this calculator moving forward on an annual basis to calculate user fees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you'd mentioned several meetings back, the state DEM was doing a study of all the PSAPs and was going to put something out that related to the basic funding formulas. Have you heard anything further about that or how that's going?
I know that was a project that was being worked on in earnest pre-COVID. I think they've been distracted since COVID hit. So I don't know exactly if they're on track. I'm thinking that they're not on track. They expected to have that information out by June, at least a draft report, but it's not out yet.
Okay, that's understandable. Thank you.
You know, Phil, in the last 2 years, I believe, we've covered our user fees with the sales tax, I believe.
Correct.
You know, any increase in those. So, and I don't know where we are in terms of utilizing the sales tax for debt service. You know, we don't yet have those estimates. Is there a way for us to continue to utilize some of this sales tax to control the increase in expenses for operations for the users?
There's not, once we got these user fees, our current model wouldn't support that, Kurt. We might be able to get away with it for a year or two, but going forward, we did in our model put a 2% increase for those for user fees.
Okay.
So I do have that. It's one I've been working with our budget advisor or our bond advisor, and so we do have that we're working with. And we did a 3%, and then the subsequent years we did 2% for user fees increases for the next 30 years.
But perhaps we could put a piece in there that,
Do you want to take a look at that?
sure, but I was just thinking that if we had something in the future language on this that said something to the effect that any additional sales tax that's available can be placed or used toward reducing user fees. And then if it's there, great. If it's not, then we've all got to scrape a little deeper.
So this I'm assuming that you can see most of this chart
Yes.
all the way through like AC, anyway, column AC.
I get through Y, but
Yeah.
well, there you go. Yeah, AC.
Let me move.
No, I can see it.
So if you look at the $14 million project fund, that's using some of our cash balances to be able to fill in some of this gap of the 15.6 million current budget projection for our new facility. And so if you look at column C, that's looking at 2020 and 2021. What this is a sales tax adjustment of minus 30% this year and a minus 15% for next year. And then a modest increase of 1% and 1.5% going out for the 30 years.
Okay.
And so that's what we project for our sales tax revenues. So we don't get back to our 2019 numbers until 2032 as far as sales tax dollar collection. Again, that's not accounting anything for inflation or anything else. So that's just a strict dollar to dollar look.
Okay.
So I think that's a fairly conservative outlook. And so I feel comfortable with that. This does then in column G look at user fees and what our current user fees are in 2019 and 2020. And then with a 3% increase in 2021, a 3% increase in 2022. And then it goes to a 1.5% increase in subsequent years for the next 28 years. A similar model there. Go ahead. Is there a question?
I just had a question. Which column is that in?
That's in column G.
Oh, okay.
So that's it. It's the user fees. So it's 1.973 million, 19 and 20. And then just over $2 million in 2021, about $2.1 million in 2022, and then a 1.5% increase going forward. And then if you look at excise tax, this is where we get our E911 tax, and we're at nearly $1 million now, or we are at $1 million for projection for this year. And then it also has a modest increase going forward. And then our radio ops revenue is dollars that we get for lease agreements and fees for using our tower sites.
Okay. And is the excise tax based on historic in what we've seen, or the increases, I mean?
It's a conservative look at it. We've had some kind of last 10 years is probably pretty bumpy because the number of cell phones and those types of taxes, excise taxes on cell phones has exploded. And then some landlines have decreased, and so it's been a little bit bumpy over the years, but Rachel probably can look at that a little bit more closely and say what it is. But we're again taking a conservative approach to what that ongoing increase would be. So it hasn't been it hasn't been as easy of a look back as other ones have been. At what point does it level out? I don't know.
Yeah, as technology has changed, over that same number of years, it's been, I'm sure it impacts it significantly.
And is there going to be another option going forward where it's not going to be a telephone anymore like we know it today? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's a chip that's going to be implanted, huh?
So then I put out operations expenses. Can you see it move?
Yes.
Okay. So we have our total revenues then in column P. And so that's taken radio ops, it's taken the excise tax, it's taken the sales tax revenue, user fees, all and lumping it in together. And then it lists in column R, our estimated debt service at around $830,000 a year. This is going out 30 years instead of a 20-year bond like we had originally had talked about. So that decreases or makes our numbers look a little bit better. We also will have a 10-year refund availability at 10 years to take a look at that and see where we're at. And then that balance for other purposes is kind of showing what our operations expenses, what we have left to do our operations expenses going forward. So is that understandable so far?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Then I have salaries and wages broken out separately than operations, even though it's part of the operations budget together. So if you will, it's salaries and wages and then supply side budgeting in two different columns. And I have a 2% increase on salaries and wages going forward. And I have a 2% increase on operations. Those are regular operations expenses. I'm taking what our current radio operations budget is. We're not, Rachel, help me here if I misspeak, but we're not currently funding that as far as a depreciation account or anything. What we are doing is making transfers as we have needs. My suggestion would be to put money in there annually to cover the expenses as they come up in the future.
We are doing that transfer that you're talking about into our equipment account right now. So we're doing $38,000 a year to help cover future radio costs out of radio ops or radio reserve.
Okay. And then in column AD, it shows our total operations expenses. And then it shows in column AF, our annual ending cash flow. Originally, I had thought that what we should do when we were budgeting this, when I was working with the bond advisors, our financial advisor, it says that why isn't that number a cumulative number? And he says that we typically don't do that. We just want to look what your annual cash to expenses are, what your annual revenues are to expenses. So our annual revenue to expenses stays above zero. We never have deficit spending for any year. But these could be cumulative funds, and we don't have it listed here on this spreadsheet, where we don't take the last year's ending cash balance and carry it over to the next ending year's cash balance. So these are strictly that year's cash flow, ending cash balance based on revenue and expenses comparison. You understand that?
Yes. Phil, I have a question. If you raise salaries and wages by 1% to 3% going down instead of 2, would we still have positive ending cash balances?
If I made salary and wages 3% increase annually?
Yes.
We'll see real soon here. No. We get to zero at line 18 or at 2031.
And that's kind of a concern. I mean, I know you've been very conservative on the revenues, but I'm looking at the expenses, and while the 2% for salaries and wages may work, I assume we have benefits in there too. And with what we've all experienced in recent years with healthcare expenses, I'm not sure the 2% on an expenditure assumption would cover all that.
Okay, well, that is salaries and wages does include the benefit side as well.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, so so it
So
doesn't.
it includes healthcare
So yeah, this is a 3%. This is a 3% annual to annual look.
right.
And we would have deficit spending beginning in 2031. We would have some cash flow that would accumulate over those years if we were to accumulate it. So there would be approximately $4 million in there. So we would be able to live off of cash reserves for a couple of years, but we do have some time to calculate that as well as we continue forward. The only thing that we will know for sure is that our bonding or our debt service for the facility was the only thing that would remain the same.
Right. Okay.
So that's a good look into see what that would do.
Yes.
Phil, that was kind of neat. Can you humor me and put 2.5% in there and see what that looks like?
So we get out to 2037, and
Okay.
it's only $500,000 at the end of 30 years. Different than the 1.5, if I remember what that number was just before.
And with the built up cash balance, we may well cover that through 2051 or whatever that is.
Just that I've seen cash balances seem like that they're ripe for somebody's taking. You know, we can't control what future boards will do or
Right.
other needs might come up. But this is, you know, that gives us a balance of $5.7 million before we get into a deficit spend. So,
Right.
and that would cover that because it's $4.6 million deficit number. So that 5.7 would carry you through that 30 years.
That might be kind of a target number as we look forward, several
Okay.
years.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess at that 2.5%, we could always work and understand that our parameters have to, for contract negotiations and stuff, have to be inside of that number, for the long-term benefit. This is moving some money into a regular depreciation account, even though it's not specific depreciation, but just to cover some of those radio expenses and some of those equipment and expenses as they're coming up, rather than have one time, $38,000 now is going there, and we're suggesting that we would move more than that 38,000 going forward. Okay.
And Bill, just one other quick question comes to mind. Now, this is on current authorized staffing levels. Is that correct?
Yes, at that 23. Yes.
Okay. I know we've been discussing some additional staffing, support staffing and things. At some point, should we try to factor some of that into these projections as well? I know it won't change it a lot, but it'll still be a significant number.
Yeah, and depending on how you do that. So there's a lot of what ifs going forward. When I get fully staffed, for example, there won't be as great a need for that position of recruitment and retention if we ever got onto that space. Again, a totally what if. And so there would be an opportunity to reassign at least the dollars for that. If it's not the same person, at least to recruit for another position that way. So if we ever get to that 23 spot, but yeah, it could be complex, but yeah, that would also have to weigh in to all the decisions about how we're going forward with our total budget on all of those suggested changes. Absolutely.
Okay, is there any Phil, were you looking for an action on the proposal for the user fee today, or is this
Right.
food for thought for now?
I just think it really needs to be food for thought. Just we're planning, budgeting for 2021 and going forward. And I know entities, users are looking for how are they going to build their budgets for the next biennium or the next year. And so we just need it for planning for all of us, I think.
Another thing to consider with this is certainly as we go forward, those projections will become clearer as what they may actually be. Whether the economy rockets forward again or continues to lag, we'll have better understanding of what that will be and over the next couple of years. So some of these projections can be modified too, and they may not look so bleak, or they may. It's just hard to say.
Kurt, how long did it take us to emerge out of the 2008 when you got back to numbers that look similar pre-2008, say 2000?
10 years.
10 years?
Yeah.
So having this
On the sales
projection,
tax.
huh?
On the sales tax.
So having a 10-year projection like we have laid out here as being probably fair.
Yeah, but I don't see that with this one. I mean, that one, we dove down and we remained flat for a long time. I mean, we just didn't see the increases. This I see as being more, and we've seen this from some of the economists and such, being more of probably a U. I wouldn't call it a V, in terms of we're going down now. We've hit rock bottom at the end of April because of all the, stay home, stay safe orders and business being shuttered. And now, of course, we're beginning to see those open up again. So again, we'll see the economy begin to rise again and increase. But unfortunately, throughout this whole ordeal, 20% of our workforce has lost their jobs. So we still have this high unemployment number that we're grappling with as well. And so, everything I've seen from the Federal Reserve Chairman to economists talk about, more of a U curve will come out of it. But it may take us another, through the end of next year before we really get back to maybe where we were in terms of the economy. So, I'd kind of pay heed to that and give that some consideration. As I look at the forecast here for you in user fees, the only suggestion I would have is, if we could, I'd almost rather try to smooth this because you're showing, 3% increases here in, I think it's 21, 22, and then tapering down a little in the future years. And yet I see the next two probably being maybe some of the most challenging, at least in the near term for us. And maybe if we could kind of maybe even bring that down to 2% and just hold it at 2 for 4 or 5 years rather than, 3 and then dropping it to the 1.5. That's the only suggestion or consideration I might ask. And when we come back to take formal approval, I might look at this a little closer and have that as a recommendation, Phil.
So if I do an average of the 30 years, it's 1.6. If you wanted, we could just overlay a 1.6 all the way through the whole, all of it. Rather than having and that smooths it out all the way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that would work too. Again, it's whatever the board, it's a board decision, but I'm speaking for myself now that at least for the city of Longview, and where sales tax is such a big piece of our revenue stream that we're going to be hardest hit here within the next couple of years, and it's going to be most challenging in terms of presenting a balanced budget.
So that looks like, that'll end up being the same, 1.6%. It doesn't, or 1.5%. It's a little bit different. It's not a total apples to apples comparison because you got that instead of that 3%, then 1.5%, that's 1.5% out of a pretty big jump.
Right.
So it just levels it out over 30 years.
If it provides the cash flow needed, that would be something certainly I'd support.
Yeah, I think it's something that I feel like that we can live with. you know, rather than thinking that it's just going to go away. I know some agencies have thought that sales tax would someday make user fees go away, but I don't see it in our operations that would be able to make it go away.
Right.
But certainly this type of a flattening certainly makes it plannable for everybody, and it's modest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So how would that be reflected in the language on the proposed fee language? I know you were mentioning a 3% or CPI percentage, whichever was greater, I think is the language you proposed.
Yeah, what I would do for user fee language is says that over that the user fees will increase 1.6% per year.
Okay.
Until change that's, you know, I just like that for now, you know, and then the future board could take a look at that and see if that's reasonable or how are things going.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we can review annually if we wish, or biannually, or however often.
Yeah.
Because there may be some significant changes in our local economy, you know, trying to think positively. If we were to gain another major industry or something, it might really positively impact sales tax and property tax and those kinds of things that we all depend on.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alan. I think, you know, looking at this and if you prepare annual budgets or biennial, that would be a consideration. But, you know, at the end of the day, the board will decide upon not only, you know, the user fee increases on the revenue side, but will also be the ones that guide the expenditure side of the equation. And if we're providing for, you know, increased expenditures or unexpected type of disbursements that we didn't know of, you know, we will have to cover those. And that will be covered, I assume, then through, you know, looking at the entire picture, which would include user fees, and we may need to adjust those accordingly at those times.
Okay, so for today, do folks feel comfortable proceeding with that 1.6% number, or would folks like some time to consider that and bump this out another till the next meeting? I'm open to suggestions.
Well, I'd kind of be interested in a discussion on 10B, the bond and sales tax update, and maybe not today, but even going forward over the next month or two before we committed to something. That's my 2 cents.
Well, you just got the sales tax and bond update right there. I mean, that's really the information I was going to share there.
Well,
So,
I think it would be good to use this information to take back to our individual agencies and get input, and then come back maybe at the next meeting, or David, yeah, or the first of next month. I think then everybody will have time to plan.
Love Dave, nobody notices you.
Okay, sounds good.
For you, Phil, if you a couple weeks, if we wait till the next meeting, would that be sufficient time for you to
You know,
do?
if we're talking numbers, you give me a 2%. You know, or we can plan on 1.6. It's either way. You know, we don't have to approve our budget until the end of the year. But you know, this would just give the bond. I have a bond underwriters interviews on the 23rd and 24th. And so we're just trying to get this number kind of finalized for them to take a look at that, so that they have that available for their use. So I certainly can work with them and with our financial advisors and just have them put that 1.6% in here. And so that their underwriters see what that is and see that they're willing to support that.
I would support that. And I guess, you know, in those meetings, if they felt that was too conservative and you needed to go up to 2, I would support that. You know, I guess up to 2, but if we could have it at the 1.6 and that worked for everyone, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I'll work with our bonding advisors to to put those.
Okay,
numbers.
so it sounds like we'll have folks take that back to their groups as a preliminary number, and then we'll revisit it. As long as that sounds good to the Starfleet commander. Dave Buffet. Yeah, thumbs up. Thank you, Dave.
That makes sense to me.
Okay, so we'll move along. Our next item 9. Do we have any resolutions or ordinance? I didn't see any in the packet.
There are none.
Okay. Then item 10, director's report, which we've already, I think, covered some of those items, but well, go ahead, Phil.
I'll give you a staffing update. Right now I have 2 people in training, so that gives us our numbers at 19 and 20. The 19th person is in their 6th month of training and progressing. I would expect that she would probably be on her own come September or so. I have another one that's in training that's struggling quite a bit. This is in his first 2 months. I'm going to have a discussion tomorrow night with him and his trainer, or on the following morning they're on night. So I just have to plan time to be with them and see how things are going, see how we can help with that. Have 2 people starting tomorrow. So on June 11th, we have, that'll be our 22nd, our 21st and 22nd people that we would be hiring. So right now at that stage, I would probably be trying to hold it right about there and not do any additional hiring. So if we can keep our staffing at that 20, 21, 22-ish and not try to get to the 23. I think that's a workable solution for now, and not knowing what's going to happen in the next couple of years as we come out of COVID. And so in a way to kind of control some of our expenses there. Any questions on staffing?
It's just remarkable that we're now talking about not having to hire more people versus where we've been in the past. That's very positive.
Well, I'm glad you think of it as remarkable. I've been kind of feeling frustrated, but good. Thank you, Alan.
Well, it is encouraging. I was going to say, do you prepare any kind of a spreadsheet, not on individuals, because obviously, you know, until you receive word from anyone, you don't know what their plans are. But I was thinking more in terms of eligibility for retirement. Do you do anything like that, Phil, where you have 5 people eligible to retire in the next 2 years, or that kind of a worksheet?
Makes sense.
We do have that. We don't have it as a formal worksheet, but we do have identified in the next 5 years we're going to lose 5 people.
Okay.
But the next ones that are planning on retiring won't retire for 66 and a half months, or 66 and a half paydays is what I was told this morning. So the next one I'm thinking is 66 and a half paydays. So
How many haircuts is that?
I don't know. With me, I could go a long time without a haircut.
Yeah, Kurt,
Probably notice. You get.
Okay.
They already know when I get haircuts.
So COVID haircuts
we're 2 years. We're 2 years. There certainly is one that has indicated no interest in going anywhere, but certainly is eligible. And so any given day, any given time, probably would be that one. But 2 years before the next person was planning on retiring.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, climate, and so we kind of went over the facility bond and sales tax update, and I've had Norm here to help me walk through some of that that amendment to that contract. So we're really
but it wasn't needed, Phil. You did a great job.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to have somebody to have your back. So anyway, we're making good progress. We have our 7th. Well, we have a design development meeting on this Friday. That's supposed to be completed at the end of the month. So we have our final meeting on the 26th, and then that is due completed by the 30th. And then we go into a construction documents phase all the way through the end of September. And this is the time that will also be spent in July, August, September with getting our special property use. It'll be finalizing our lease agreement. It'll be getting permits for the work to be done, or getting the construction documents ready for bidding to be done. We've been working with the city of Longview about what the timelines are for the different, how much time does engineering need? How much time does building and planning need? And so we have those numbers that were in weeks dialed in as well. So we're really progressing pretty well. We're trying to find ways to trim some of the costs that we have. For example, we, for practical purposes, are no longer going to use a metal roof because of ongoing radio problems that a metal roof might present. And we're going with the asphalt shingle roof. And so those types of decisions are being made to help change our costs some too. So just by that change, it's $120,000 less to have an asphalt shingle roof.
Okay.
Long-term maintenance increases, but at the same time, that does change some of our it's for a good practical reason. So we're looking at everything that way during this design development. The group is active. The facilities committee has been providing lots of input. It's been very valuable and it's been helpful. So we're really are on target for the facility. It's hard to take Dave seriously sometimes, but
I think he's French heritage is coming out here right now.
Like the fashionista.
Yeah.
This is great.
As far as the progress, does the architect have any idea about when we may be able to go out to bid? Are we on track for that, or are we looking around the first
going
year?
out to bid in October and expecting those back and to award contracts in November and to start construction December.
Okay.
So it's usually about 3 weeks that you go out for bid.
Right.
And then another, bit of time to consider to review the bids and that type of thing. And then get everything ready to go to award the contract in a meeting in November. And then construction can start in December. That's what our target is, and that's where our foundation. That's where we want that that pilings done in December and the foundation done by, close into the first part of 2021.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's an aggressive timeline, but we so far are able to stay on it. It takes sometimes it takes a push, but so far everybody's responding favorably.
GG as in George, right?
We'll talk a little bit about climate and culture. I've taken and worked, first of all, we've taken the wellness committee and put the wellness committee together and come up with some ideas of ways that we can help our people to be better minded every day and that type of thing. And the passive approach hasn't really worked. Like, hey, here's some stuff that you can do. So we've been a little bit more deliberate in some of our actions. And so I worked with specifically over the last 2 months with the administration team, with a lady, her name is Cindy Cook, who has helped us a lot with some of the mindfulness and the approach that we take to work every day. And it seems to me that the administration team has taken a lot out of this coaching that we've had and the training that we've had, and are starting to express themselves in ways that they haven't before. And then so it's a crawl. We start with a crawl and then to a walk, and just a constant continuing pressure to try to improve our work environment. And again, the proof's in the pudding. As we look backwards, it's hard to see the day-to-day changes, but it's my goal and our goal now collectively for us to continually work together and trying to create an environment that's a great place to work and people find fulfillment in the work that they do and support from their environment. So that's what we're doing in climate and culture. Radio infrastructure, we have that another meeting this morning about getting started on the radio towers, those 4 radio sites, of getting that work done. It's been kind of back and forth a little bit, maybe a little bit of a, hey, we've had a little bit of a communication problem occasionally. But yeah, we're keep on pressing towards that market, getting Woodland and Deer Island and Castle Rock and West Longview work started. So again, appreciate the support on that. So that's kind of the director's report. If you have, we have that CAD discussion under old business too. I would like to give an update on that as well, if you want that now. Or
Yeah, that'd be good, unless there's any questions on anything else for Phil right now. Okay, yeah, CAD discussion.
So I've been focusing a lot of my attention, or a good bit of my attention, on getting Spillman and the total cost of that. And I got an apology from the salesman this morning again. Let's see what he says. Yeah, I'm really sorry for the delay on getting the updated quote over to you. So we're still continuing to struggle with getting that updated quote. And what they are looking at is what it's going to look like for us to be together with or apart from Lewis County. And our deadline for kind of making a really final decision on that grant is coming up in the middle of July. I think we have our first, well, I don't think, our first report is due July 15th about what we're doing with that grant as far as our performance of that grant. And really like to have a decision about whether or not we're going to pursue that. It's been certainly a different set of challenges, you know, working through this Spillman initiative and going that direction. And I haven't got those final numbers from Spillman yet. He again apologized today. He said he'd have it to me by the end of today, but I've heard that last week as well. So we're just struggling with getting some of those numbers so I can get a good number to the board about what this is going to look like going forward. But our primary focus right now is on Spillman. If that's, you know, if we're going to continue down that pathway, I've had a discussion with Cressa already. Cressa is looking in a direction without us, and so they are making plans for their work and their assignments to their people of us not being part of the Cressa model or the Hexagon's intergraph model. So we are kind of heading out on our own. Whether or not we partner with Lewis County or not is still a big if. And it does appear to me that we'd be better off by ourselves than with Lewis County, but that's just anecdotal information. I don't have anything that I can just pin that on and say, this is why specifically. So any help from any of you?
Anything for CAD discussion? Did I hear somebody? Okay, doesn't look like it. I'm not hearing anybody now. So anything under board comments or board committee reports?
Hey, Joe, before we go on, could I just, there's 2 other things that I just wanted to touch on. Maybe you heard, but we had a Freon leak here at the comm center a few weeks ago, and we were in the process of evacuating. The whole Hall of Justice evacuated, but we were in the process of evacuating to the backup site for you know, our dispatchers to move over there. Right now our capacity, and if we had to do a hasty evacuation, is just transfer our phones down to Cressa, and they would only say that, hey, Cowlitz County, you have a call and this is what it is, and everybody would be required to monitor a frequency. County Main is where it would go. So that's kind of the details of our backup plan right now as far as when that goes. We did not end up evacuating. I had a person headed over to the backup site when we got our first real numbers about what our air quality was inside of the center, and then found it to be a permissible level and that we would be able to continue on with that. So it just points out the real need for some redundancy and some backup planning. And so not partnering with Lewis County does cause me some angst, but some of the same challenges that we were facing with going with Cressa are some of the same challenges that we have going with Lewis County as well, because of numbering conventions and what the CAD program is able to do. So we're just working through those things and just wanting you to be aware that we had that event. And then our radio maintenance contract comes up at the end of August. And that's currently with Day Wireless. We have, with that contract, have the ability to renew it for 2 3-year terms. Rather than going out for an RFP, right now, I would prefer that we would renew that contract with Day Wireless for another 3 years. And so we can bring it up for discussion again in July at the July meeting, but don't have to decide until August, in our August meeting. And I can look at that with Frank to see if that can just be, if we have to take formal board action on that, as it's already written in the contract that it's mutual agreement between Day Wireless and Cowlitz 911 about moving forward with that additional 3-year agreement. Okay.
Phil, just a question, going back to the Freon leak just a little bit, made me stop and think. Would it be beneficial somehow to, I don't know whether model or drill or whatever that, in the event that we did have to suddenly evacuate the current location, what that would look like and what other hurdles there might be, or what things that maybe we need to be looking at to ensure that we don't, we don't totally lose service. I don't know if you follow where I'm going with this. I mean,
yeah, I hear what you're saying, Al, and that's those are always good points, but it's also part of our planning on developing a new CAD system, and that how are we going to develop that backup and redundancy so that we don't, so that if some event happens here that we do have to evacuate, how are those calls being answered and how are they being routed?
Yeah, and how are various agencies notified, and I mean, just a whole litany of things come to mind about what could go wrong, and how we could open ourselves up for missing a call and the liability associated with it. So,
well, that was some of the work that we had done as far as working strictly with Cressa and being able to have them assume our backup. We weren't able to back up Cressa in that, but Cressa has Thurston County backing them up in those catastrophic events. So there's some sort of a domino effect there. It doesn't go both ways. I think if in the event that we would have Lewis County and we were partnering with them, that we probably could cover for Lewis County, I'm not sure that Lewis County would be able to cover for us. So it's kind of like our relationship with Cressa is that Cressa could cover for us, but we wouldn't be able to cover for Cressa except on a very limited basis. So, So yeah, the stuff that we're constantly looking at and working on and trying to figure out how is it that we would manage that is, drills, exercises, or planning. They can all be done in tandem.
Okay.
A good idea.
Okay, any other questions for Phil? I don't believe we have any executive session today and no closed meetings, so is there anything else for the good of the order? All right, not hearing or seeing anybody. with anything. So if that's the case, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Dave, for the entertainment. It's definitely helpful.
Thanks, Joe.
Over
Stay
and out.
safe.
Take care, everybody.
Have a good
Okay.
day.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Kurt.
We'll adjourn at
Yeah.
11:11.
Okay.